Can't hear Councillor Pinnock.
Councillor Pinnock, she's offline.
Thank you. Thank
David
you.
is as well. David's not. That's it.
Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the licensing panel meeting this morning. First of all, we'll begin by a round of introductions. I will introduce myself and then I will go around and ask people to introduce themselves. So I'm the chair of the panel. My name's Amanda Pinnock. If I can start with my colleagues, please.
Councillor David Hall, one of the panel members.
Councillor Terry Lyons, likewise.
Okay.
I'm David Stickley. Sorry, Chair. I'm David Stickley. I'm the solicitor here to advise the panel if they need any legal advice.
Okay, licence officer. Licensing officers. Anybody there? Laura?
Hi, sorry, I think I'm just, hello, good morning. I'm Laura Dobson, Senior Licensing Officer.
Thank you. And can we have the applicants, so the police officer, please?
Yes, firstly, Andrew Garthwaite, Solicitor for West Yorkshire Police.
And Richard Woodhead, West Yorkshire Police Licensing Officer.
Thank you. And the licence holder?
Yes, Steve Kerr speaking.
Thank you. And the licence holder's representative?
Yes, Tony Dales, representing Steve Kerr.
Thank you. And then we have a number of objectors, people here to support. Could you say your names, please?
Carol Harrison.
Bethany Dransfield.
Christopher Follins.
Roger Hunt.
Lovely. I think that's everyone. Is that correct? Has everyone spoken and identified themselves?
We're just missing Neil Calvert, who was having some issues with his phone.
Okay. So we will carry on then.
Yeah.
So first of all, this meeting is being webcast and recorded. So I just wanted to clarify the position there. We will go through the agenda to begin with. So have any of my colleagues got any interest to declare? Councillor Hall?
No, Chair.
Councillor Lyons?
No, Chair.
Admissions of the public? Well, this is being recorded and webcast. Any deputations and petitions?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Questions from the public? Have we had any written questions from the public?
None received.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go straight into the application then. So this is an application for a review hearing under Section 51 of the Licensing Act 2003 in respect of the Rose and Crown situated at Cop Hill, Slathwaite, Huddersfield. So we will begin by asking the licensing officer, please, to outline the application.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. So as you are aware, the licensing department received an application for a review of the premises licence at Rose and Crown, Cop Hill, Slathwaite, HD7 5XA. The application was made on behalf of West Yorkshire Police. During the 28-day objection period, licensing received 22 pieces of correspondence in support of the premises and 1 objecting to the premises. The decision will need regard for the licensing policy and the Secretary of State guidelines. There is also a witness statement which was provided by a licensing officer, which I will now read on his behalf. So I am the named person, Mike Skelton. I'm employed by Kirklees Council as a licensing and enforcement officer. I am making this statement in relation to a visit I recently made to the Rose and Crown Public House, Cop Hill, Slathwaite, Huddersfield, HD7 5XA, on the 2nd of June 2020. At approximately 1300 hours on the 2nd of June, I received a phone call from my senior officer to say that the council had received a complaint about the Rose and Crown. The complaint was from a member of the public and alleged that the Rose and Crown was open with the beer garden very busy over the previous weekend with no social distancing taking place. On the 26th of March 2020, the council had received another complaint from a member of the public alleging something similar at the Rose and Crown. I made PC Katie Jagger, West Yorkshire Police Licensing Officer, aware of this. PC Jagger reported back to me that she had spoken with the licensee, who explained that it was nothing to do with the pub and it was just some walkers who were taking a rest on his tables in the beer garden area. After receiving the second allegation that the pub was open at approximately 1315 hours on the 2nd of June 2020, I called PC Jagger to make her aware. It was agreed that PC Jagger, Richard Woodhead, also from West Yorkshire Police Licensing, and myself would do a joint visit to the premises that afternoon. At approximately 2:35 on the 2nd of June, I attended the Rose and Crown Public House in Slathwaite with PC Jagger and Richard Woodhead. As I exited my vehicle, I observed a gathering of 4 people sat on a bench in the grassed beer garden area. I would say they were in their 40s and comprised of 2 males and 2 females. They were drinking alcohol, with one of the females drinking a glass of wine. One male had a pint of beer, and there were also what appeared to be 2 bottles of cider on the table. There was no social distancing taking place. As we approached the entrance to the pub, I noticed a further 3 people sitting on a bench. Again, no social distancing was taking place. A male from the table got up and approached us. I now know this male to be Mr. Stephen Kerr, who is the licensee and designated premises supervisor at the Rose and Crown. PC Jagger introduced us to Mr. Kerr. As PC Jagger and Richard Woodhead engaged in conversation with Mr. Kerr, I noticed a sign by the entrance of the pub that clearly stated 1 in, 1 out. I asked Mr. Kerr where the lady in the beer garden drinking wine got the wine from. Mr. Kerr said that it was from his wine dispenser. By that, I thought he meant some sort of wine on tap that he had in the pub. We all entered the pub to talk further. Just through the entrance are the male and female toilets, and to the left is the bar area. Whilst at the bar, I asked Mr. Kerr if he could show me his wine dispenser. He then went behind the bar, opened one of his fridges and presented me with an opened bottle of wine. It would appear that Mr. Kerr was directly decanting wine into a glass should a customer purchase one. This, in my opinion, is an on sale. I also asked Mr. Kerr what had happened on the previous Friday and Saturday. Mr. Kerr admitted that the pub was very busy with customers queuing to get into the bar. He also stated that he could not control where his customers consumed their alcohol. I believe he could have easily moved all the outdoor seating so not to encourage groups gathering and consuming alcohol on his property. Mr. Kerr also admitted that those customers who were drinking on his property were using the toilet facilities. Mr. Kerr did not explain how he kept the toilet area sanitised after customers had used them. As I returned to my vehicle to leave the premises, I witnessed Mr. Kerr go to the table where the 4 people were sat with a tray and remove the glasses and bottles, giving further evidence that the drinks were purchased at the premises. As Mr. Kerr removed the items, he did not practice any social distancing either. Thank you, and that outlines the application from me.
Thank you. Do my colleagues have any questions for the licensing officer? I don't have any questions. Councillor Hall?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I could I just ask the licensing officer what legally constitutes the premises? Does that include the beer garden and benches in front of the pub?
Yes. So Mr. Kerr is able to serve alcohol from the bar onto the premises in the beer garden.
Thank you.
Any more questions, Councillor Hall?
None, Chair.
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay. So we'll move on to West Yorkshire Police then. Could you please outline your application?
Grateful. Thank you, Chair. It's clear to be said from the outset that whilst the position in relation to licensed premises has moved somewhat since the incident in question, it's key that the legislation and the rules in place on the 2nd of June and prior to that are taken into consideration, because the fact that there may be a loosening of lockdown, social distancing and the various COVID-19 rules does not, in the respectful representation of the Chief Constable, detract away from what is said to have occurred on the 2nd of June and arguably before. Now, the committee have helpfully had Mr. Skelton's statement read to them. I think there is perhaps a typographical error in one of the dates given. I think there's a reference on page 1 to a complaint being received on the 26th of March. I think that should actually read the 26th of May, given the chronology. But beyond that, it is a statement that the Chief Constable asked this subcommittee to consider and take on board, because it's clearly indicative of the issues that are ongoing at this establishment. The review application that's been submitted by Mr. Woodhead, which features at Appendix A, helpfully sets out the background contact made by Mr. Kerr and the advice provided to him. And the committee will see that on the 26th of March, PC Jagger speaks with the licensee and effectively gives advice in relation to what needs to be done. 27th of March, both Mr. Woodhead and PC Jagger physically visit and speak with Mr. Kerr about what would constitute on sales, off sales, and how to comply with government guidance. And it's key from that the advice that's provided, which is contained in the seventh paragraph down within the second page. PC Jagger and I, that being Mr. Woodhead, asked that all benches in front of the pub be removed or taped off to ensure customers were not encouraged to gather or remain at the premises consuming their off sales. Goes on, Mr. Kerr agreed that all benches would not be used. He would sell alcohol to customers, but it would be off sales only, and no one would be encouraged to remain at the premises whatsoever. Now, the issue that arises is that it is quite clear from the evidence that's provided that those sales that are taking place on the 2nd of June are clearly not off sales. Whether they are intended to be or are deliberately not off sales is sadly undermined by the fact that the beer garden remains open for business. And as has been advised in the advice provided of the question answered in relation to what legally constitutes the premises, the beer garden is effectively premises, and any consumption within that area will constitute effectively an on sale. Now, what compounds the issue is the fact that there are further previous complaints made of similar behaviour taking place. Now, I have had sight, as I'm sure the subcommittee has had sight, of the various letters of support that have been provided. And on the face of those letters, one could easily come to the conclusion that the complaints being made are the work of a nefarious individual with a grudge. The difficulty with that argument is that when 3 independent individuals attend at the premises on the 2nd of June, the supposed grudge complaints are proven to be absolutely correct. That there is effectively alcohol being consumed on site, that the beer garden is not taped off for business, and in essence, whether they are deliberate on sales or a complete misapplication of the off sales practice, the COVID-19 regulations are clearly being breached. If one then goes back to the statement made by Mr. Skelton, and again, this can be confirmed by Mr. Woodhead, who is present with me and was present on the day in question. Mr. Kerr is asked by Mr. Skelton what happened on the previous Friday and Saturday. This relates to the complaint made as to the purported 60 people being present. Mr. Kerr admitted that the pub was very busy with customers queuing to get into the bar. He could not control where customers consume their alcohol. Well, Mr. Skelton makes the point very clearly and succinctly, more so than I ever could, that he believed that that could have been done by moving all the outdoor seating. And it's quite clear in this particular instance that had that been done, either by taping off or complete removal, that if this is a situation whereby Mr. Kerr wishes to put these were off sales gone wrong, then that problem, the sheer volume of numbers, the risk of social distancing being undermined, and the risk to public health could easily have been avoided. I've had sight of the varying letters of support, and I note there is a general air of positivity put towards Mr. Kerr and his premises. And let's make it clear that West Yorkshire Police are not saying that prior to these incidents, this was an establishment that caused any degree of concern. Far from it. But the difficulty is that no matter how respected, charitable, conscientious Mr. Kerr may be, there is a very clear failing in this case to do that which the entire country has been asked to do, which is namely comply with lockdown legislation and stop the spread of a disease that has in effect closed the world for business. Now I can sit here and take views one way or the other insofar as the actions that have been undertaken here. And let's be clear that I don't have a lack of sympathy for Mr. Kerr having to find his business forcibly closed through no fault of his own as a result of legislation that has been brought in demanding pubs and other types of business close with immediate effect. But likewise, and whilst I'm sure the subcommittee have exactly the same sympathies, they will have sympathies for all the other individuals out there who have had to comply with lockdown measures, who have been denied the opportunity to see loved ones, who have been furloughed, who have been made redundant, and crucially, they will have sympathy for all other licensees in this area who have abided by the rules. And it is that aspect that I asked the subcommittee to think very carefully of today. Because whilst we are in a position whereby the Rose and Crown can trade, it can do so under the various provisions that are currently in place, that does not negate the issues that have occurred. And there is, I'm afraid to say, the grim spectre of COVID-19 that continues to loom large over the country and the world as a whole. And whilst I don't sit here with any form of insight, because I certainly have none, that there would be any form of local or national lockdown come back into place, the key aspect here is that that remains a possibility. And one has to be clear that in determining this review, should a further lockdown arise, what message will be sent to the licensees of Kirklees should this be deemed a one-off slap on the wrist scenario. There has been compliance, broadly speaking, by the entire population and by licensees to comply with what they are asked to do, a financial hardship to themselves, no doubt, but to control the spread of the virus. If the message is effectively sent out that a person is able to trade in breach of those conditions by performing a perfunctory online license service, and there will be no punitive element at the end of that, then I don't think it needs to be spelled out in great terms as to what potential risk may arise should others feel that that is a route for them. this is not a situation whereby the licensee has gone into this situation blind. He has not stumbled along in the misbelief that he can do this or that. He's had very, very clear advice from Mr. Woodhead and PC Jagger as to what he can and cannot do. And there may be argument raised in due course that there has been some conflicting advice provided by an officer from the neighbourhood policing team. Well, with respect, if that is raised, that is an irrelevance, because the advice provided by Mr. Woodhead and PC Jagger has come from the experts in licensing for this area. It will be akin to somebody trying to blame me for their divorce going badly wrong simply because I am a solicitor when I don't practice in that particular area and I have given some negligent advice. Mr. Kerr was told, take off your beer garden or remove the benches, and he did neither. Or if there was any steps taken, he has failed to enforce them. Because if one turns to within Appendix C, support letter 14, it makes it quite clear that one of the individuals in question, whether was there at the time of the police or prior to their arrival, accepts. I was on a walk on the 2nd of June, which took me past the Rose and Crown, a route I often took as it provided me with access up to Marston Moor. He goes on, having arrived at the top of the hill on such a hot day, it would appear that Mr. Kerr, in typical generous style, self-offered me a coffee, something he'd done in the past. I declined.
Sorry, Mr. Gathwaite, could you just tell us which page you're reading from, please?
You'll have to forgive me, ma'am. I have an electronic version. I've been sent everything individually, so I don't have page numbers for any. All I can say, and it may be that the licensing officer can assist better. It's within Appendix C, and it is in the email that I've the attachment I've received, the email support letter 14. And I'm sorry I can be of no further help on that front, ma'am.
We have a paginated bundle.
Right.
And there are over 20 here.
Yes. Well, it okay. May be, if I, the key aspect from this letter of support is that it effectively, even though it falls on the side of Mr. Kerr, it sets out sadly exactly that which the police say has taken place, that there are people sat on a bench, and the justification that the author tries to make is that I was invited to sit with them outside at a long, large bench table, which gave more than ample social distancing. Well, the difficulty with that is that nowhere in the law does it allow for social distancing to take place within licensed premises consuming unlicensed sales or gifts or whatever it may be within an unlicensed environment during the course of the pandemic. And whilst there may be mitigation for what has taken place, there is no defence. And against that background, the Chief Constable asked the committee to carefully consider the response it needs to provide in this particular case. Now, you will, of course, be advised by your learned legal advisor, Mr. Stipley, in due course as to your powers, and indeed the subcommittee will be eminently knowledgeable of such powers, being experienced in dealing with reviews of this type. You will know that you have the power to revoke, to suspend, to change the designated premises supervisor, to add conditions to the licence or take no action. I would submit that the latter would be a very dangerous approach to take, given that this is a scenario that sadly could raise its head again. And I don't say that specifically for the Rose and Crown, but in general. As I've already stated, should there be another lockdown, whether local or national, and pubs are forced to close, there has to be a clear message sent to the licensees of this council area and indeed at large, that such breaches of the legislation cannot be tolerated, because put simply, it is there to protect the wider public from harm. And whilst it may be argued, well, there were only 3 people there were only a couple of people who were in attendance and they kept their distance, it is sadly not the issue. The spread of this virus takes no account of social niceties, class, distance, etc. The whole point of the legislative impact is to reduce spread. And if effectively people from different households can come together in whatever proximity, the risk of one passing to another and on and on and on is sadly there, whether reality or not, it is a clear risk. So against that, I asked the subcommittee to carefully consider the other methods of disposal available. Whether the subcommittee feels that this is a situation that merits out-and-out revocation is a matter for you. But I would certainly advocate that a punishment in this instance needs to be considered, and that suspension is a real and viable option for the subcommittee for however long or short a period you see fit, to send out the message that this type of behaviour cannot and will not be tolerated. Should the subcommittee feel that there is a need for a disposal less than that, then it will be the respectful submission of the Chief Constable as a very minimum. There needs to be a variation to the licence conditions so that the CCTV requirement is put in place so that it can effectively monitor the risk of any such activity taking place again. But I would strongly urge the subcommittee to look towards a suspension in this instance to mark what is a very clear breach and an undermining of the licensing objectives in this particular instance. Those are my representations. I'm of course happy to answer any questions you may have, and indeed Mr. Woodhead is present and will be, I'm sure, able to assist on any issues of fact, as it were, from either incident you have questions on.
Thank you, Mr. Gathwaite. I have a few questions. So I just want to clarify that the number of times the police have been in contact with the pub. Just to clarify, so from Mr. Woodhead's statement, there was a telephone call made on the 26th of March.
Yes.
But then it goes on to talk about the 27th of March. So is that really the 27th of May, not the 27th of March?
No, that is correct, ma'am, in that instance. So on the 26th of March, that is, from memory, I think the lockdown provisions came into force on the 24th or the 25th of March. The 26th of March, there is, in fairness, reference in there to a complaint. So it may be that I'm mistaken in my assessment of Mr. Skelton's statement, and he is correct on the 26th of March when he speaks in a complaint. But certainly on the 26th of March, PC Jagger speaks with Mr. Kerr after he effectively seeks advice in relation to what he can and cannot do. And on the 27th, both PC Jagger and Mr. Woodhead physically attend at the pub and speak to him about the situation. And I think Mr. Woodhead will be able to confirm that if I'm incorrect on that point.
Yes, Chair. Both myself and PC Jagger attended on the evening of the 27th of March. It was a Friday evening. We'd been tasked by one of our supervisors to go around various pubs in and around the Combe Valley area and the Home Valley area. And because we'd spoke at length earlier about the Rose and Crown, we went up and saw Mr. Kerr in person and told him what he should and should not be doing. Thank
you. I raise about clarity because later on you say throughout April and May you received a number of complaints, but there was an attendance at the pub. So I'm just wanting to know, throughout April and May, did you attend at the pub? So I'm wanting to know how many times did you communicate?
Personally, I didn't attend.
So did the police attend in April and May?
When said the complaints came in, it was through the intelligence system. There were phone calls from members of the public concerned, and and then we did re-attend at the beginning of June. I think during the period of April, when the complaints were being received, it wasn't licensing that attended. It was it'll be some of our neighbourhood policing teams that were checking up and investigating the offences.
Okay. Do we have any details from them about what they saw?
One of the attending officers did confirm that there were people sat in the beer garden at the time. However, Mr. Kerr asked him if the social distancing was correct. Now, unfortunately, for Mr. Kerr, the MPT officer, neighbourhood police officer, didn't really know the licensing legislation or the government guidelines for off sales, and the officer confirmed that the social distancing was correct, but the social distancing shouldn't have been there in the first place because the benches should not have been there in the first place. So the attending officer did not know licensing legislation at the time.
Okay, thank you. So around the 2nd of June then, I'm thinking about the state of affairs at that time. Do we know what the infection rate, the death rate was around that time?
That would be information that I certainly don't have to hand. It would be fair to say that come June, there is a relaxation in the rules that are in place. However, at that stage, and you'll have to forgive me, Ma'am, I'm going completely from memory, I believe that shops didn't reopen until the 8th of June, and licensed premises certainly were not, I say shops, non-essential shops were opened on the 8th of June. And insofar as licensed premises are concerned, that was certainly later on in the month indeed. Was it the beginning of July when that?
It was July the 4th.
Yeah, July 4th. Yes.
Yeah.
So at that stage, yes, there was a relaxation. The hardened lockdown, if I can put it in those terms, that came in 24th of March, had obviously been eased in certain aspects. But insofar as licensed premises were concerned, it was exactly the same rules at that stage as it had been when the Prime Minister announced lockdown.
Okay, thank you. So since the 2nd of June then, do we have any more information about how the Rose and Crown have been conducting themselves?
I'll hand you over to Mr. Woodhead on that point, because I think he will be in a better position than I to advise on that stage.
Since the 2nd of June, Chair, I can confirm we've had no complaints at all. When the visit was when we went up in the afternoon, when we found the customers sat consuming alcohol in the beer garden, we asked Mr. Kerr to cease off sales and said, look, this is, you're obviously in a position where you can't manage your customers attending the premises. So the best way forward for yourself would be to cease off sales until legislation changes. And since the 2nd of June, we've had no complaints at all about any customer activity at the pub. We then put the licence review in on the 3rd of June. And again, we've had no sort of complaints or anything about the actions that the pub's taken since.
I asked that question because I think later on in some of the supporting statements, it indicates that the pub license was suspended, which sort of indicates that they weren't open. But maybe I can put that question to the license holder to find out what the situation is. So just one more question for me then. Mr. Garthwaite, you indicated that you've had no concerns about the pub in the past. Have there been any issues that you feel that the panel should be aware of at this stage to help us to decide on the conduct of the Rose and Crown in general?
In general, it will be fair to say no. Specifically, it is all that which relates to the COVID breaches, if I can put it in such terms. Mr. Woodhead, I'm sure, will confirm that up until the reports that have been coming in since lockdown, this was not a licensed premises, certainly on his radar, and certainly not a licensed premise that caused any concern to West Yorkshire Police. And so it would be unfair of me to try and attempt to paint any alternative picture, because that clearly isn't the case. They are, it could be said, specific breaches in specific circumstances, but of course they are serious in their specific aspects, and so it's that element that I asked the subcommittee to bear in mind. I am sure you will have representations made to you to say that the premises have been fine both before and after, and I have no doubt that that will be an aspect that the subcommittee takes into consideration. But I would say, from the point of view of dealing with this, that is mitigation rather than explanation as to why there has been a breach. Marm, if I may just say, in relation to the point that you raised, and I'm sure the licensee will be able to confirm that whether our understanding is correct or not, or mirrors yours, but we were also under the impression, given the tone of the letters of support saying please reinstate licence, etc., that it may be that there is a misapprehension that the pub cannot trade at this stage, and belief that they are effectively applying to get their licence back rather than for you to consider our application.
Thank you. Councillor Hall?
No further questions, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Lyons? You're on mute, Councillor Lyons.
No, I'm quite happy with what I've heard. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will move on to the licence holders representative then.
Yep.
So Mr. Dales.
Yes, hello, Chair. Yes, I can hear. This is Tony Dales. Just to confirm, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
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 Yes,
good.
thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
Chair, I do have some questions now for licensing, and some of them relate to Mr. Woodhead's comments regarding his visit. I'll try to make I don't want to go over doubling up and duplicating questions, and some of which you've asked already, for which I'm very grateful. The first thing that I'd like to ask of the licensing department is that during the lockdown, Mr. Kerr had actually run the licensing just to inquire which areas of the premises inside and out were licensed. Do you have any recollection of that conversation that Mr. Kerr had with yourselves?
Hi, no, I don't, I'm afraid, Mr. Dales. I don't believe it was me personally that he spoke to about that matter.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Can I move on to the next question then?
Yes.
That in 2019 specifically, Mr. Kerr inquired about the use of his grassed area. I'd like the committee also just to refer to my exhibits TWD1 and TWD2, and if you could have those in front of you, please. The TWD2 shows a grassed area well away from the premises, and it's past the two car park areas. You'll see several picnic tables. You can see those okay?
Yes.
Yeah. When he made a specific inquiry in 2019, he was informed that this area was unlicensed. It was not a licensed area. And if he wished to actually undertake any sales of alcohol or any drinking in that area, he would either need to submit a full variation to change the license, or if he was wanting to undertake any particular activities on there, he would need to submit a temporary events notice. Are you aware of that conversation? Is anyone from the license?
Sorry, Mr. Dales, was that to me? No, I'm not aware of that that conversation. Okay. No, but no.
Okay, well, following on from that, then I'd like you to have a look at Exhibit TWD11, which is a temporary events notice dated the 28th of April 2019. Once you've got that in your possession. Can you confirm that that is in fact a temporary events notice application made by Mr. Kerr in order to licence the grassed area that we're referring to?
Lower car park and field. Small marquee was requested.
At the bottom end there.
Yeah.
And so that confirmed that Mr. Kerr's area there wasn't licensed. It was not part of the premises licence. So there was no issues of on sales there because it was not licensed. And he actually got that temporary events notice granted.
Sorry, Mr. Dale.
For 50th anniversary celebration. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was the temporary event notice that was requested was for a small marquee. So there would have been a bar within that temporary event. Yeah. Within that marquee.
Yeah. So that actually did confirm that the area was not licensed and that it needed to be licensed through the temporary events notice. Am I correct with that?
You would need the temporary event notice to license the bar within the marquee.
Yes, that's correct. So yeah. it would license that particular area.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. I think I know the answer to this one, but I will ask it. And normally with premises licences, there is a plan drawing attached and is held within the council to confirm the licence areas. Are you aware of any plan drawing being in existence or available at all?
Not off the top of my head, but I can, if you give me just 2 minutes, I can double check to see whether we do have that available.
Yeah, I'd be ever so grateful. It is, as you can see, it's the issue around the grassed area and being licensed. But I wanted to clear up that as there was quite a lot of emphasis put on it by Mr. Garside in relation to that particular area.
Yeah, I'll have a look for you.
Thank you very much. This is a question that the chair has picked up on already. I'm trying to establish here that all of the complaints originated from just one complainant. Is anyone able to confirm that all the complaints did in fact come from one individual?
As far as West Yorkshire Police are concerned, that will be an issue subject to public interest immunity. I'm not prepared to reveal anything in relation to that.
Yeah, sure. No, can I just, I appreciate that we're not identifying anybody here. All I'm asking is it from the same complainant? And I think that's
there is more than one complainant.
Question to ask.
There's more than one complainant.
There is more than one complainant?
There is more than one complainant.
Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you. Can we now confirm to the chair at all? We know the number of visits that the police made and the number of complaints. Do you have any record of the actual number of visits that were made by the police and licensing?
Police.
So far as West Yorkshire Police are concerned, there were 2 visits made by PC Jagger and Mr. Woodhead, and there was 1 visit made by neighbourhood policing. I can't comment on any independent attendance that may have been undertaken by council licensing enforcement.
Okay. Obviously, that's quite important that we're trying to solve. I will cover that myself with Mr. Kerr later on, because there was in fact 8 visits to his premises based on complaints received. Do we have any police mark-offs at all regarding these visits? In respect, say, for example, that everything was fine when the police got there. Do we have anything of that nature?
Well, there's obviously a disagreement between you and I in relation to the number of visits. Insofar as the visits undertaken by the licensing officers concerned, 1 was in relation to advice being provided, 1 was clearly in relation to the incident on the 2nd of June, and the information that we have insofar as the MPT visit is that which has already been alluded to by Mr. Woodhead. So I'm not quite sure what is meant by mark-offs.
Yes, results of the visits by the police, but obviously we are in a disagreement there that Mr. Kerr was visited and he logged the number of visits that he had. where police officers spoke to him. So the fact that we're in a disagreement, I don't think we can take that one any further anyway.
I would have to say in response to that, you obviously haven't been provided.
Who was at the visit on the 2nd of June, and just how they found Mr. Kerr when he arrived, his attitude towards all this. We seem to be getting a feeling that Mr. Kerr was disregarding everything and perhaps being a little bit obstructive, but I wonder if anybody could throw light on how Mr. Kerr, responded when you were visited on the 2nd of June.
Yeah, it's Richard Woodhead, West Yorkshire Police. I was in attendance. No, Mr. Kerr was sat at a bench with, I think, his partner and a customer, and then the other customers were down in the lower field. I wouldn't say it was obstructive in any way. Any questions we asked, he answered in full. He took us into the bar area, showed us the bar where the drinks have been dispensed from. But overall, no, it wasn't obstructive. But his actions highlighted the sales had been taking place in the bar. The customers were outside on the benches, had purchased alcohol from him. And I think when you mentioned earlier about the temporary event notice, this is about COVID legislation. He was told to remove his benches, and when we attended, the benches were still in place. Whether they were in the field or were in the car park is of no matter. Whether it's licensed premises is of no matter. If you were acting as a takeaway, which Mr. Kerr was, there should have been no benches and no facilities whatsoever under his control for customers to use. That's the issue here.
Okay. Could I then ask you in relation to that, could you, and I think this is probably one of the better pictures, if you could have a look at TWD8 for me. There's a picture of looking out of the entrance to the toilet area, from the toilet area out to the main patio area. And there should be directly in front a picture of a table, a big concrete table, right in front of you. And that's the same as the other tables that are located on that particular patio area.
Yes, I think Mr. Wood has been saying that. Yes, that's been seen.
You got that? Yeah, those tables are concrete structures within that patio area. And I'm just asking the question, number one, you feel it's reasonable that those big concrete structures should have been removed then from that patio area?
No, I think the point that's been made repeatedly by myself and Mr. Woodhead is either that they be removed, and if they can't, if you're saying that they're concrete, all well and good, they should be taped off. And there are plenty of examples of that taking place in the country. One only needs to go to Leeds Magistrates Court to see the number of chairs that are taped off there when they cannot physically be removed to indicate that people cannot sit there.
Okay,
so
I'm very grateful.
Some tape would be very easy to have put in place, even if it couldn't physically be removed.
Yeah, I fully. I'm very grateful for the explanation of that. Thank you very much. At this present time, Chair, that is my questions completed. I do believe that my presentation of what's going to go on now will throw more light on certain things. So I'm going to cease my questioning at that point. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dales. Could you then present your representations then, please, on behalf of the licence holder?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much, Chair. By the way, can I just say that Mr. Kerr does have an hearing problem, and sometimes we do have a lag coming through. I'm going to speak very slowly now in my presentation so that I'm certain Mr. Kerr can hear what I've got to say. He does have an hearing aid, and as I say, that does sometimes give an high-pitch whine as well. Okay, I'm here today to represent Mr. Stephen Kerr, the owner, premises licence holder, and the designated premises supervisor of the Rose and Crown Public House. Present today, as you've heard, are Mr. Kerr, the DPS, Mrs. Kerr, Mrs. Jane Carey's wife, Mr. Folds, Mr. Stephen, Mr. and Mrs. Stephen and Carol Harrison, and Mr. Roger Hunton and Mr. Neil Colbert. All these individuals, all in attendance, responded by email during the 28-day consultation period, and all would like to address the committee today and answer any questions you may have. I would also refer to the email on page 8, which is in your bundle, and that is the one dated the 30th of June, for clarity, dated the 30th of June, timed at 1916. This is from Mr. Neil Haig, who resigned from Dora. He was the individual that was sitting at the tables on the 2nd of June, and he has asked if the chair is happy that his email is read out in full to the committee at some stage. It will be easy, having heard from the police and licensing department, that you may think that Mr. Kerr is an irresponsible landlord who, at the time of COVID-19, impacted on us. He saw the opportunity to make money without consideration to the safety of himself or others. This simply isn't the case. And I will be presenting information which I believe will paint a true picture of Mr. Kerr and how he attempted, number one, to keep his business ticking over during this difficult period. Mr. Kerr opened the takeaway service as a direct response to the government guidelines. And I'd like to remind you that these are guidelines that you've got at Appendix 1. And it was down to then individuals to try and interpret those guidelines depending on the size of the premises and the number of employees that were employed. It is to note that Mr. Kerr, at the time of his off-licence, was the only person dealing with the off-licence issue. So there are no other employees involved in that particular activity. Mr. Kerr does describe his premise as a restaurant bar with an emphasis on food with alcohol as a supplementary offer. He has a premises licence which allows for the sale of consumption of the premises, and you have the premises licence in your bundle. The premises have been run by Mr. Kerr for the past 13 years. He took them over as almost a failing business with a very bad reputation in the area as a community hub, if you like. And since this time, he's built the business up and is seen as an important part of the local community. Most importantly, during this period, he has worked closely with the police and licensing department, and you have heard from the police and licensing today that there is no record of any problems being recorded for the premises up until the lockdown actually commenced. You've also already read the numerous emails, over 20, and there could have been more support for Mr. Kerr. Not only just as a landlord for the 13 years, but during the COVID operation. Mr. Kerr, at the time of lockdown, had alcohol in his premises in the form of keg beers, which could not be left in the barrels. Also, part of his restaurant business, he had an extremely large amount of flour and potatoes and other perishable items. He saw, quite simply, this would also be useful to the community that live in the rural area, or many who are isolated, elderly, and a distance from local shops and supermarkets. As a result of this, he set up his takeaway business. He communicated this by Facebook, and documents at TWD 7 and 13 in your bundle are an example of his messages that he sent out. I'd very much like to focus on the text in TWD 7, where he clearly states, after the pictures of the alcohol and his flagons that he was using, it says to enjoy at home, social distancing measures apply. This indicates from the outset that his sales were for people to enjoy at home and not on the premises. You will hear firsthand from those present and will have read the supportive emails. that Mr. Kerr, prior to COVID, was an individual that helped others, providing much needed support above and beyond his role as a pub landlord. You've already seen, and I've produced some aerial photographs and also shots from the premises to give you an idea of how the premises are set out. In particular, the grassed area, what people are referring to as a beer garden. And I think it's very important. I appreciate what they're saying about COVID and the different rules and regulations, but it was clear in Mr. Kerr's mind, because of the efforts he'd made to inquire about the area that was licensed on previous occasions, and the fact that he'd had to submit temporary events notices to license that area, that in Mr. Kerr's mind, in his genuine opinion, the grassed area was not licensed. What they call the beer garden, which you can see on TWT, was set up by Mr. Kerr not as an extension of the premises. He improved, if you look at TWD1 compared to TWD2, you can see the amount of work that Mr. Kerr did to landscape that particular area shown on TWD2. The aim of that area was to allow it to be used by picnickers, walkers, cyclists, local people from the area who used that area as a walk, and we'll refer later on to the fact that this is a specific walk that is used for going from Mr. Kerr's premises out into the countryside. And for that reason, I'd like you to focus that the sales that Mr. Kerr made where individuals then chose to go to those tables, and there wasn't that many that did that, but they did choose to go to tables. This was not an off sale. This was an off sale, not an on sale. Mr. Kerr will explain further that he then previously then inquired not only about the temporary events notice, but during the COVID period, and I appreciate it was police officers attending, if he was doing the right thing, if he was doing anything wrong, other than we're talking about, he did, I think we've missed a point here that he was asked to actually fence off or tape off the car park to prevent cars coming in, which he did. The car parks have been fenced off. What he had great problems with was this about taping off chairs and removing them. And in his mind, that didn't apply to the grassed area, which was unlicensed. And as you've heard, as I've already said, the grassed area, he had to apply for a temporary event notice in order for it to be licensed to undertake licensable activities in that area. So let's just progress to the period post-lockdown, which was the 19th of March. From the outset, Mr. Kerr acknowledges the difficult task both the police and licensing have had in trying to police and interpret advice and guidance from the government, which we have to say at times for us all has been confusing and somewhat contradictory. In addition, Mr. Kerr also struggled with this. Mr. Kerr, on his own admission, has made mistakes, and these mistakes were isolated. They were not intentional, they were not willful, and certainly not with the intention of putting his own family and community's health at risk, as suggested by the authorities. You will hear from Mrs. Kerr about the makeup of the family and the elderly parents that they have to look after, and how important COVID and sticking to the rules and regulations was to them. Mr. Kerr is a person who abides by the law. He respects authority and prides himself on his morals. Once again, the emails received from the community support this. With regard to the matter under review today, Mr. Kerr closed his business on the evening of the 19th of March as instructed. It was quite interesting that Mr. Kerr has said to me that immediately after the 19th of March, the first thing that struck him was the number of walkers, cyclists and people in the area visiting around the area, even post-lockdown at that early stage. I think you will recall that the weather was glorious, and Mr. Kerr recalls numerous inquiries as to whether his premises were open as a takeaway and whether his toilets could be refused. He refused requests to use toilets. He explained to people at that early stage that he was closed. And it was not until he decided to set up the off-licence business that he was actually opened again, as I say, as an off-licence. Mr. Kerr made a business decision in respect of his premises. He had goods that were going to be thrown away if he did not use them. And he saw this as an opportunity also to support the local community. I think any referral to this being purely for financial gain and for no other reason is very unfair to Mr. Kerr. He developed a social distance policy, and a large majority of his sales were processed through Facebook and payment made via a card machine or bank transfer. We'll hear from people addressing you later on that was the case. I will let Mr. Kerr address this issue a little bit further when he speaks to you. With regard to other police visits, and I think this is very important, Mr. Kerr, as police officers, were arriving at his premises, some during the day, some during the night. On all but one, his premises were either shut or there was no one in the area. I find that very strange that we haven't got a record of those incidents, but so be it, we don't have any record of them. But it's the fact that police officers were attending Mr. Kerr's premises, and during the day, on several occasions, Mr. Kerr actually asked the police for advice. Was he doing the right thing? Because basically, if he was not doing the right thing, then he would stop. All that the officers were able to advise him was that, no, you're doing nothing wrong. You need to just make sure social distancing applies. I think what I'd like to do now is go to up until the 2nd of June. Basically, we had no offences being committed, and then we had the visit on the 2nd of June when the police arrived. It hasn't actually been mentioned, but I'm going to mention it, that on that day, Mr. Kerr made a mistake. He made a mistake on his own admission. He sold a glass of wine to a lady who was sitting in the glassed area, and he did that as her husband had ordered a load of flour from him, and he'd asked for a flagon of his takeaway beer, and also they'd asked for a glass of wine. Mr. Kerr made the mistake. He said to the lady that he only sold bottled wine and that it could not be opened. The lady asked him and said, would he do her a favour of giving a glass of wine? He agreed to it, and that was his mistake. The people that were seen drinking were mentioned by the police in the grassed area, and that is where they took the drinks, down to the grassed area. Well,
Mr. Dales, have we lost you?
Hello?
Hello, I think we lost you there for a few seconds.
Oh, I do apologise, Chair. It didn't appear to say anything on my phone, but what I'm going to finish off with now is quite simply that Mr. Kerr is very keen to address the committee and to give his explanation of why he took the actions he did, and to very much talk about his efforts to make sure that he complied with COVID-19. It's as to whether you wish to ask me questions first, or whether you would like to hear from Mr. Kerr before any other questions are addressed to us. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think the best way to deal with this would be to hear from Mr. Kerr. Then myself and my colleagues will ask questions. The police can ask questions. Then we can hear from the other objectors, stroke supporters, and then again questions can be asked of them. Okay, so we'll hear from Mr. Kerr next, please.
Good morning, everybody. It's Tree speaking. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I just like to give the committee a little bit of background to myself. Obviously, we can't meet face to face, so I'll do the best to try and describe myself. I am the age of 59. I am from a large family background. I have generations of licensees going back to my grandfather and my grandmother, my father, my mother, and now myself. So we are 4 generations of licensees. So we're not unwise to the workings of the license industry, but unfortunately, COVID has hit, just thrown a different perspective on things. I am married to Jane. I have 3 children and 3 grandchildren who I love very much indeed. I moved to the Rose and Crown in 2007. The Rose and Crown has got a long history. It was first licensed in 1826, so it has been a community pub for a long time. And I do pride myself in the pub business recovery, and it was a pleasure taking on the Rose and Crown and using it up to the standard that it is today. I currently employ 20 local people from the area, and obviously a revocation of my licence would have a serious effect on the employment of these people. I have enjoyed the challenges of being self-employed since the age of 32, and in the 27 years I can honestly say I have never experienced anxiety or stress of a level from the last 4 months due to the COVID-19. Since we were given 6 hours notice in order to lock down on Friday the 20th of March, it has been horrendous. And now I find myself fighting to keep my licence. My future livelihood, the retirement prospect, could be dissolved following this hearing should I lose my licence. The responsibilities of the food trade operator are huge. People think it's easy. As a freehold business owner, you are expected to be an expert in legal, financial, human resources, health and safety, marketing, psychology, Mr. Personality. Along that, you need to be a dad, a husband. It really is a difficult thing. On top of that, the fears that go along with the business are fears of survivors, the unknown, personal fears, and there's a lot of fear from the authorities, especially during the COVID scenario. During the lockdown period, the lockdown hit us all just before Mothering Sunday. And I don't know whether you can recall, but that weekend of the lockdown was extremely good weather. And people were out and about on Mothering Sunday. And believe it or not, we were actually getting phone calls asking if we had tables available, because obviously people's bookings were cancelled due to the COVID lockdown. And we were actually getting phone calls on that day, could we have a table? But we also realised what was required with the lockdown, but it doesn't mean we were reckless. Since then, I've tried my best to serve the demands of the community by offering perishable goods of flour, potatoes, eggs, anything that people would care to take. I feel I've made a small difference to people's lives during the lockdown in my own way. I am disappointed that it might not be to everybody's liking. Even though there has been an element of bitterness from the government and the authorities regarding lockdown, I have tried my best. I have always had a high level of respect for the police. In fact, my best friend is a retired police inspector, so I know how it feels being on the police side. I have a hell of a lot of respect for the police and the authorities. I have delayed reopening the Rose and Crown until the 30th of July. Even though we could have opened on the 4th of July, I feel as though it is a responsible thing to do, in my opinion. And I do want to get the reopening, I want to get this right for customers and staff. I fear of reopening is very strong. The fear of the reopening is due to financial pressure and physically and mentally. So there is a big fear of the reopening. I'm sure we'll all look back on the pandemic and ask what could we have done differently. Even the government admit they are still learning and have made mistakes. Would Dominic Cummings do anything different, or would Boris Johnson have done anything different? During the lockdown, I did get visits from the uniformed police officers, and during the lockdown we had 8 visits from uniformed officers following alleged complaints from members of the public. I did ask them if I was doing anything wrong, which is the police uniform, and if I was doing anything wrong, could you please tell me? And if they had told me to stop, I certainly would have done immediately. But they didn't. They just reminded me to take care of social distancing. In fact, it was on one occasion when a police officer asked me, I believe you serve Farmer's Blonde at the Rose and Crown. I replied yes, and the officer said, that's wonderful. I will call back another time when I am off duty. It was a very respectable, scenario between us, and I just thought it was a nice thing that police officers have a genuine respect either way. Following various visits, of which some were of the same unit officers, trying to establish with the officers why we had so many complaints, the reply was, has one of your neighbours got a grudge against you? They have checked the telephone number and it did appear to be the same number. During some of the visits, I was actually in my living quarters and came downstairs to meet officers on the car park, as there was nobody sat in the picnic and grassed area. There was some visits when just me and Jane were sat outside enjoying the lovely evening sunshine and no other members of the public were around, but the visits continued. I must say that at least 95% of people, including locals, did not stay at the Rose and Crown after purchasing. They either went home, carried on with their walk or cycling journey. Those that did stay went over to the grass picnic area, which is the bottom area on the lower car park. This area is not licensed, and I'm confident to say that because the council told me so. I did not let people sit in the patio area adjoining the premises, as I do believe that this is a licensed area. The Rose and Crown is situated on the Colne Valley Circular Walk. It is also on the Heritage Trail, and there's many public footpaths in the area. We do sponsor a guidebook for the Walkers Welcome organisation. We do attract a lot of walking visitors during the good weather, especially cyclists and vintage car members. People did queue and wait their turn and talk to each other when they were waiting for takeaway service. But they did take social distancing very seriously indeed. I did keep the toilets open on some occasions, and they are located next to the entrance, and I feel I did not pose a risk to health. I had a one in, one out policy for the toilet, which also caters for disabled people. Notice displayed with additional hand cleaning and hand sanitising were available. The police said that this was a public nuisance issue and the people were entering the bar area. This is certainly not the case. The toilets were there to prevent people from going to the toilet in public places, not to increase public nuisance. On the 2nd of June, I'd just like to talk about the visit from the officers, the 3 officers. The weather on that day was very good, and I was outside enjoying sunbathing and relaxing with my wife, Jane. For me, I look back on the visit on the 2nd of June from the 3 officers following an introduction. Following the introduction, I found it extremely stressful to try and give answers to a barrage of questions and accusations. The comments that were made, such as comments from the officers attending, were, "You were happy to take the grant money. This is purely for financial gain." I found it hard to comprehend these comments. It made me feel physically sick and sweat profusely, and my body was shaking. I felt in total shock about the situation I was facing. I struggle with hearing, and as I wear hearing aids, but I tried to answer questions the best I could and explain the reasons behind the complaints made about me. Then one of the officers told me I was that far off losing my licence. I could not believe. Excuse me 1 minute, just 1 minute. I do apologise for the connection, but it is a very emotional moment. So I was this far off losing my licence. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But there seemed to be an intent of persecution towards me, and I feared I was not going to convince these officers, no matter what I said. I offered my CCTV to support that I've been doing things properly, but they declined the offer. The CCTV is available for anybody to view, and I've offered this to police officers during the visits and the uniform as well. On leaving, I asked the officers if I could carry on with the off sales, and they replied it was my choice, and they will be doing spot checks. Following the visit, at the end, I had a long chat with Jane, my wife, and we decided to close down completely, regardless of what the visiting officers had said. It was a huge disappointment to many of our customers in the community. I'd like to just talk generally to the committee that I have controlled quite a few situations in the 3 months of lockdown. Some people did need guidance, and I did offer the guidance regarding social distancing. I'd also like the committee to know that we didn't just offer alcohol, we offered teas, coffees, soft drinks, ice creams, water for the dogs, our four-legged friends, and also people who required a cold drink of water during the walks. I do believe I work selfishly for others. It comes naturally to me, and it is the way I have been brought up. I personally love being a landlord. I love the interaction and looking after people. I'm naturally a carer bird, so to be criticised for being the way I am, I find very hurtful indeed. I understand the law is the law, and I understand that I've made one mistake on the 2nd of June by selling a glass of wine to a lady who did not want a full bottle of wine. I paid the fixed penalty immediately. I made a mistake, and I sincerely apologise for that. There is a judgment in a stress we all have to face, but more so in the hospitality industry, as we all know. And I have to say that hindsight is a wonderful thing. For the future, I do want to make sure people visit the Rose and Crown feel safe from the virus. We are all under scrutiny in these unprecedented times, and that even includes the government. The Rose and Crown is the pride of the community because the people are proud of it. And believe me when I say that I am very passionate about my business. I thank the committee for your time, and I ask you to consider the points that they have made. I am available now for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kerr. I have a few questions. So when you gave your representations, you talked about, the lack of understanding, the ambiguity of, what was expected of you. Because some of the information that was received from the government, for example, wasn't very clear. And my question really is, if you were unsure about things, why didn't you contact the council's licensing department to find out what you should or shouldn't be doing?
Well, obviously, it's a concern. I think when I did get visits from uniformed police officers, it was a shocking experience to get visits from uniform. It always is when you see a police car pulling onto your car park. But the uncertainty was, I asked the police officers if there was anything that I am doing wrong. And the response was, no, just make sure that people do observe social distancing, which is very, very important, and I understand that. But I do believe that most of the requirements were sort of self-explanatory, but I think members of the public saw it differently, and that's where the problem lies. But when the police tell you you're not doing anything wrong, I honestly believed the police, and therefore I perhaps feel as though I was led into, I suppose, a false sense of security that if you're not doing anything wrong, you carry on. So that's all I can say to that question.
Okay. So, Mr. Kerr, you've heard evidence today from the police, from Richard Woodhead, from the licensing officer, and also we've got this bundle of information setting out what was said, what was done, so on and so forth. And it's clear from this, the police are saying that, you were approached at least on 3 occasions. On the 26th of March, there was a telephone conversation. On the 27th of March, you were visited. On the 2nd of June, you were visited. I know there were some visits in between from officers, but what seems to be clear is throughout all these visits, you were told that there was an issue. You were told that, you were advised really that you should remove the benches and you should tape off the area to discourage people from using that area, to consume their drinks and so on. I'm just wanting to know why you didn't follow the advice of the police, even though it was said on 3 separate occasions at least.
Well, I do recall the phone call from PC Jagger on the Sunday where a member of the public had rang a complaint through. Apparently people were sat outside the Rose and Crown drinking. They were walkers and they were drinking their own flask and eating their own sandwiches. And I do recall PC Jagger saying, look, you need to close the car park off. And I did. I put a barrier across the front of the car park, which was in place when PC Jagger and PC Woodhead visited me on the following day. And I asked them if that barrier was sufficient, and they agreed that it was. So I did take action from the early stages. The benches could not be removed. They're too big. Maybe I should have taken them off, but to be honest, I'm always on site, and anybody who attempted to sit on these benches, I did ask them to remove themselves because it is a licensed area on the top patio area. So I would not allow anybody to sit on that area other than family or friends or me and Jane.
Okay. So the day that the police came on the 2nd of June, where they approached you, where were you sat at that time when they approached you? Where were you?
I was sat on the top patio area with my wife Jane and Neil, who was a friend who was walking in the area. I'm sure his email is available for everybody to read. And that's where I was sat when the officers came.
Because the officers also indicated that there were other people occupying benches. Is that correct?
Not on the top patio, no. The other people, there's a group of 4, as they rightly say in their statement, and they were on the bottom area, what we call the picnic area. They were not on the top patio area.
Okay. So talking about social distancing then, because you said that, you tried to encourage social distancing. Could you tell me how you tried to encourage that? What did you say to customers who came to purchase alcohol and other items?
Well, you've seen the advertisement that we did on Facebook. It clearly states there that social distancing rules apply. When people did come to the site, we emphasised that people have to wait outside while I do get drinks or goods whatever they need, whether it's power. The people did take the social distancing serious. If there was anybody close together, then I would remind them that social distancing is very important.
Okay, so what about the toilets then? When people use the toilets, what sort of measures did you use then? Were the toilets cleaned regularly? What system did you have in place?
Well, basically, the toilets, as you can see from the photograph, is literally one step inside from the front door. Listen, don't get me wrong, people are walking in the area. Me and Jane, we sat outside, they just call and ask if they could use the toilets. I said, I'm not going to say no. I'm really not going to do, especially anybody who is desperate to use a toilet. I'm not going to say no. I do point out that they are in the entrance area. There is cleaning hands. There's facilities inside there to use. I clean the toilets regularly myself anyway because me and Jane use the toilet. When we live here, when we go out of that front door, that's our front door to our living accommodation. So we use them toilets ourselves. So they are cleaned regularly, and there is plenty of sanitizer and soap available for customers to use.
Okay, all right. So we're here today, obviously discussing, about your license and whether in reality you haven't followed the guidelines and whether you've broken the law. In your opinion, would you say that you haven't broken the law and that you followed the guidelines? I just want some clarity around that.
I honestly don't think I've broken the law. I mean, there's 4 licensing objectives that we all have to follow. I do not believe I've breached them objectives. So I don't really understand why the West Yorkshire Police are saying I have breached them all. But the only one occasion was obviously selling this glass of wine to the lady, and for that I have had a fixed penalty, and I have paid it without argument. So I do accept that I have in theory broken the law.
Thank you. No more questions for me. Thank you. Councillor Hall?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, just a couple. One of the emails that's been received alleges that on one occasion on the 29th of May, there were about 60 people outside on both the patio terrace area and the grass drinking and not sticking to any social distancing. Do you recall that, or do you recognise that allegation?
Well, obviously, I've seen this email. I was very, very surprised when I saw it. It was a Friday evening. The weather was exceptional. There was a lot of people milling around in the area, and I honestly, I don't feel as though that anything was wrong. There was obviously a large number of people, but I don't recall doing anything wrong on that evening at all. I'm very surprised at the number of people that this particular witness has commented on. I do not recall that many people being there. It's an over-exaggeration.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll leave that there for the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Lyons, any questions?
Just the one question, Chair. That was Mr. Kerr said he was shocked when the police called. Well, I thought as a pillar of society, and he got on really well. I wonder why he was shocked.
Mr. Kerr?
Can you just repeat that? Sorry.
Mr. Kerr, are you there?
Yes. I just wanted to ask if you could repeat the question, please.
The question was that you say you're a pillar of society up there and respected by so many people, and yet when the police called on you, you said you were shocked. Well, why were you shocked? Because it could have just been a social visit, a question, or whatever. Did you?
I was talking about the 2nd of June.
The visit. I mean, to me, that sounds as though you've almost got a guilty conscience that you're shocked the police come.
I just think it's a shock whenever you get a visit from the police, you know. Because I don't believe I was doing anything wrong, so I was surprised to see the police. If we're talking about uniform police visits, then there's no warning, the police just turn up, and it always is a shock, even with 8 visits. Every single visit is a shock to me, because the first question I have is what is the reason they're calling, and they reply that there's been complaints. So it is a shock.
Councillor Lyons?
Thank you for that.
Any more questions, Councillor Lyons?
None.
Thank you. So I'd like to move to Mr. Garthwaite. Do you have any questions on behalf of the police?
Yes, I do, ma'am. Thank you very much. Mr. Kerr, can I just piggyback, as it were, onto the question that was put to you by Councillor Hall? You were asked about the email in relation to allegations on the 29th of May. Can I clarify, have you read the statement of Mr. Skelton?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Can I refer you to the second page of Mr. Skelton's statement, and towards the bottom, and I'll just read it so that you know what I'm talking about. I asked Mr. Kerr what had happened on the previous Friday and Saturday. Mr. Kerr admitted that the pub was very busy with customers queuing to get in the bar. He stated that he could not control where customers consume their alcohol. And then Mr. Skelton gives his opinion as to what you could have done in the circumstances. Your response to the councillor's question was that you honestly didn't feel that anything was wrong. Do you still stand by that in light of what Mr. Skelton's saying about your seeming lack of control over the customers?
I'll refer to Mr. Skelton what my opinion is of his statement. Is that what you're asking there?
Well, Mr. Skelton has said quite clearly you could not control where customers consume their alcohol. You felt that there wasn't any issues. Mr. Skelton sees differently. Do you want to revise your opinion, or do you stand by the fact that there were no issues, as you said to Councillor Hall?
Just bear with me. Just bear with me 1 minute.
Yeah, take your time.
Have you got the bundle there, Mr. Kerr?
In relation to the Friday and the Saturday, yeah, there was a lot of people around. People did queue up for takeaway service. I was constantly working inside the property. I was preparing drinks for obviously takeaway service, and then once I've serviced the drinks, people would sit wherever on the grounds on the bottom area, which was as nobody was allowed to sit on the top area, but there was a queue in that top area. So it was a sort of a busier than usual time because the weather was so nice, and there was a lot of people on that Friday night, I must admit, but I don't think it was anywhere near 60. But they weren't queuing up to come in the bar. They were queuing up to get service. That's the important thing. And obviously, I was working on my own. There was no other staff, only me serving the drinks, and I could not leave the premises because I was obviously serving drinks at that moment in time.
Thank you for that, Mr. Kerr. That takes me on to my next question, and you saved me one because you said you were working by yourself. You said in your representations to the subcommittee that you would enforce social distancing. Can I ask how you were enforcing social distancing outside when you were serving take out inside on that day?
I was inside the premises on my own. Just bear with me 1 minute. Well, the only way I can enforce it on my own is to tell people to maintain social distancing.
But if people aren't doing it outside, there's no one there to police, is there? Would that be a fair comment, or would you disagree with that?
What? Just say that again. Sorry, I can't quite make out.
Okay. Maybe the way I phrased the question, I apologise. If you're inside and you're the only person who is working, there's nobody outside to enforce social distancing. Is that fair?
Yes, there's nobody outside on the customers. There's no other members of staff or anything. But obviously, when I serve a drink, I do say to people, look, if you go to drink that, then you need to go on the bottom glass area, but please maintain social distancing. I would say that verbally to them.
So you said if they were going to consume alcohol in the area to physically go to the grassed area. That's the contentious. Is it licensed? Is it not licensed? Is that what you said?
No, I'm just saying that if they're not walking or they're not moving on, if they are staying on in the grounds of the Rose and Crown, then obviously the bottom area is the only area where they can set that drink if they want to sit down. Why do you say that, Mr. Kerr? Why do you say that area is perfectly acceptable for people to consume alcohol? Well, I'm not encouraging people to do that. I'm just saying that if they are staying in the area, that the bottom area, as far as I believed at the time, was not licensed, and it was a safe area to go. The benches that were down there were set distancing apart. They were not close to each other. There was more than 2 meters apart. So if anybody did want to sit on a bench, then it was recommended to go down to the bottom area.
And you advocated that, did you said that to people?
Yes.
Thank you. Can I ask you to have a look at the photographs that your representative has provided, TWD2, which is an overview shot of the Rose and Crown, I understand. And I'm sure you'll correct me if that's not correct.
Sorry. Unfortunately, I mean, I've got to say that this is a historical photograph, so this is not how it was set out. Okay, that's absolutely fine. I just want you to assist me and by proxy the subcommittee, because I don't know the pub, Mr. Kerr. I've never had the pleasure of visiting. I don't know the area particularly well. So you'll just have to help me with a couple of general things. And I'm sure that whether the layout has changed dramatically or not, the questions I asked should still be standard. The building that I can see, which seemingly consists of a 2-story level, and then there appears to be annexes or lower, slightly lower 2-story buildings on each side. Is that the pub? Yes.
Thank you. And is all of that the public house, or public house and your accommodation, or are there private residences next to it?
Yes, all of that area.
That's all the pub. Thank you very much. There is a car park there appears to be, first of all, a road running that disappears behind the pub. I'm presuming that's a public highway that allows people to physically get there. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. There's then there's a car park that's behind, and there appears to be a wall separating one part of the car park from another. It may be difficult to tell from the photograph, but that might be because of a effectively gradient and the car park slopes down. Is that all your car park?
Yes, it is. It's part of the property, yeah.
Grateful. Immediately outside what I would say is the main building, the slightly larger two-storey in the middle, there are some benches, and I think Mr. Dales has referred possibly to one of those in his representations through the photograph showing from the toilets. Are they the concrete benches that Mr. Dales made reference to in his representations?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. If I can ask you now to look at this slightly lighter shaded grass area, which I presume is lighter because the lawn has been cut on this photograph, and there are 5 benches there. First of all, whose is that land?
That's the Rose and Crown one. That's the area that we're referring to as the picnic area.
Thank you. So that is your land and you have control over that?
Yes.
There's 5 benches. Are they your benches?
Yes, they are my benches. Like I say, this photograph is historical, so that's not how the benches were laid out. There were 3 benches.
That's fine. I'm grateful. I'm not interested in the exact layout, but is it fair to say that there are still a bench or 5 benches or a variation or more still in that area, whether they're in that specific layout or not?
It's three large benches.
3 large benches. What happened to the other 2?
They're broken. They're not used.
What are they made from?
What they're made of wood.
They're wood, so they're not concrete.
No.
Thank you. You've said in your representations to the subcommittee that you have to be an expert in all things. Now, it's fair to say that no one can be an expert in everything, and even in their own field, they may not necessarily have expertise on every single area. I certainly don't confess to know every single law that's ever been created. So would it be fair to say that when Mr. Woodhead and PC Jagger came to speak to you and offer you advice, that would be helpful, expert guidance that you could rely upon?
Yes, that's fair to say.
And you were told to take off the car park. Is that fair?
I did put a barrier on the car park.
A barrier, okay. And you were advised to take off the benches?
Well, to close off the benches on the top area, which is what we regarded as a licensed area, even though we haven't proved what it is or it isn't a licensed area, but with it being adjoining to the building, I'm assuming it's a licensed area.
But you were told to take off the benches, weren't you? There was no distinction made by Mr. Woodhead. He told you to take off the benches. Whether that was the benches immediately outside the pub, the 2 benches that appear on the photograph in another area to the rear of the property, or the 5, 3, or however many down on the grassed area, you were told to take off the benches, weren't you?
He advised me to close off the top section area, the barrier there, so that's a clear indication to an area not accessible.
I think we might have to agree to disagree on that point, Mr. Kerr, because the advice that you were given was very clear that you were to take off the benches.
Yes,
but we'll move on from that point.
When Woodhead and PC Jagger came to see me, yes, they advised me to close off that area.
Which area? Which area did they advise you to close off, Mr. Kerr?
The the area you allowed me to close off was the top area with the concrete benches, which is adjacent to the building. Top area.
Okay, thank you. Can we move on now? Mr. Garthwaite, have you got a different question?
I'm afraid so, ma'am. Yes, I'll move on to next point, which is this. Are you familiar with the requirements of the Health Protection Coronavirus Restrictions England regulations of 2020, Mr. Kerr?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that. Just say again, sorry.
I said, are you familiar with the requirements of the Health Protection Coronavirus Restrictions England regulations of 2020?
Yes, I understand that.
So you're aware then of the requirements of Regulation 5, which requires a person responsible for carrying out a business of your type must cease to carry out that business or provide that service, except for making deliveries or otherwise providing services in response to orders received. Close any premises that are not required to carry out its business, provided its service are permitted by subsection A, and cease to admit any person to the premises who is not required to carry on its business or provide service as permitted by subparagraph A. You're aware then that your responsibility under the coronavirus regulations was to close off your premises, save for takeaway sales. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Why were you allowing people in to use the toilet?
Because well, I'm certainly not going to say refuse anybody to use the toilet, but as far as I was aware, the toilet can be used safely, and like I said, there is facility there to wash hands and sanitize.
Would you accept that use of toilet is not a takeaway sale? It can't be, can it?
No.
So therefore your requirement was to close the premises to anyone and not allow them in under the law. Not under any guidance, but under the law.
I think the guidance was available as long as the toilets were safe to use and it wasn't, for example, the toilet wasn't inside the building, you know, in an area where you've got to perhaps walk through the bar or walk through an area in the premises. But my toilet is literally at the front door. They've only got to two steps to get in the toilet. There's no access to the bar area from the toilet. Open access, that is, anyway. But I honestly thought to refuse people to use a toilet wasn't the thing to do. I just, if somebody asked me to use a toilet, I'm not going to say no.
Would it be fair to say then that it's ignorance of the law rather than a deliberate misapplication that's arisen here then, Mr. Kerr? Because for the sake of completion, I'll read it again. Regulation 5, subparagraph C, cease to admit any person to its premises who is not required to carry out its business or provide its service. Customers should not have been coming in whether to use the toilet or not, should they, under that regulation?
Well, if that's then I'm sorry. Well, at the end of the day, I just thought it was an okay thing to let people use the toilet because it was so near the entrance, you know.
And whilst I hate to return to the issue of this grassed area, that's part of your premises as well, isn't it?
Mr. Garthwaite, have you got another? Mr. Garthwaite?
Yes,
Mr. Garthwaite, I think he's answered that question. Can we move on to something else?
Well,
I think he's given an explanation. You know,
the question I want to ask is whether he accepts that that is also part of his premises, which the police say it clearly is.
I think he's answered that as well. But Mr. Kerr, can you answer that question?
Yes.
I think he answered that earlier on.
Very well.
Okay, any more questions?
Yes. You made mention of visits made to you, 8 in total. When did they occur, Mr. Kerr?
When did the police visits occur? What? 8 visits? The visits from uniform police generally were early evening between the hours.
Dates? What dates, please? You see, you'll appreciate there's a difference between us in relation to numbers of attendance. I've provided evidence that would say that you've been visited 3 times, twice by Mr. Woodhead and Mr. PC Jagger, and once by neighbourhood policing officers. Now, you say there are either a further 5 or 7 visits. I'm not too sure whether you class PC Jagger's attendance on the 26th of March and 27th of March and 2nd of June as one of those, but there's either 5 or 7 visits that's unaccounted for, and I'd be grateful to know when they took place, because with respect, I could say that I visited your pub on several occasions, but without any evidence, I can't prove that I have. So when did those officers attend, please, Mr. Kerr?
I mean, I thought the police would log a visit, you know, if you pay a visit to, they seem to have a list with them where they were going to visit various establishments or private addresses, but I thought that the police would log them. I haven't got the exact dates when all the police uniform visited, but I do recall 8 visits.
So the only evidence you have to support that is your word. Is that fair?
I just assumed the police would log the visits.
Well, I've given details of the 3 logs that I have.
Who can support that statement by Mr. Kerr?
Very well. I'll move on to next point then. Let's turn to the 2nd of June itself. You stated that you made effectively 1 mistake by serving a lady a glass of wine. That's not true, is it? There was another gentleman who you served a pint. So that's more than 1 sale that you'd made. Not just the one-off opening the bottle.
Yeah. There was a glass of wine and the 2. Yeah, there was a takeaway beer. That was in the pint. Yeah, and a keg.
Well, how was he consuming it? Directly from the keg, or was he consuming it from a glass?
No, I don't know. I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Let me repeat. You said that the beer was from a keg. Was he drinking directly from the keg, or had you given him a glass to drink from?
A plastic container.
Plastic container, and it was beer that he was consuming.
Yeah, we're drinking out of a plastic glass. But
yeah.
The way I understand, I'm just going off memory. The glass of wine I do recall, when they ordered these drinks, they ordered an extra glass. So I'm assuming that they shared the bottle beers, which were shared amongst the 3 people, and the 1 person was having a glass of wine.
Right. And then there was also the gentleman who's put in the representation support letter 14, as I have it. I know your representative has made reference to it within the bundle. And he says in there that you offered him a cold drink and he took a shandy, which was served to him in a plastic glass. So that's another drink that you served.
Yeah.
So it's gone from 1 mistake on the day to 3 mistakes already.
Are we talking about the person, not the group of 4, but the person who was sat with us?
Yes.
Yeah, that was Neil. That was a shandy, and I served it in a plastic container. But Mr. Hay, it was a drink from myself. He didn't pay for that.
It's irrelevant whether it was a gift or paid for. It's still a transaction that shouldn't have taken place, isn't it? He's not of your household. He's in an area that you say that you believe was covered by the regulations because you were sat on the concrete benches. It shouldn't have taken place. That wasn't a mistake.
Oh, Mr. Hay, Neil Hay was a visiting friend, and I offered him a coffee because he's a friend, and he just said that he would prefer a cold drink. So I offered him a glass of water, and he said, well, a shandy would be nice. When I served the shandy, he offered to pay me. I said, no, you don't need to pay me. It's a drink from me and Jane. You know, it was a drink that was served, which he wasn't paying for.
You said in your...
Could we move on?
I'm getting towards the end, Mum. I have 2 more questions. You said in your representations that 95% of your customers went home. So I take it from that 5% of your customers didn't.
I'm sorry, just bear with me. Well, 5%, 95% on average moved on. That's the way I believe it. I didn't make a record of every single customer, but there was a small minority, let's put it that way, that did opt to buy a takeaway drink on a nice evening, a cyclist or whatever, and they would just take a minute, a bit of time to have a break, sit down on the bottom benches, and then enjoy a takeaway drink.
And you thought that that was perfectly acceptable?
I think so.
What do you mean by you think so?
Do I think it was acceptable?
That's my question.
A takeaway drink, yeah, on the bottom area, yeah, I would say it was acceptable. Because I truly believe it wasn't a licensed area, and it was a takeaway opportunity for them to enjoy a drink.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I haven't asked the licensing officer if they have any questions. I should have done that. Ms. Dobson?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Right, then we'll move on. So now that we've done that, we will give the objectors stroke supporters an opportunity to make representations. So I have a number of them here. I hope I've got them right. So Miss Kerr, can we hear from you first? Mrs. Kerr?
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
Hello. Right. So for me, not protection obviously is paramount. My mum is 86 and self-isolating. I've been doing a liquor shop, and as she is a vulnerable person, I have to do everything I can to protect her. Sanitation at my home, which is the pub, is very important. For Steve and myself, this whole license review period has been a very difficult time for him, having his name dragged through the mud at the hands of recently the press and keyboard warriors, etc. It's not public knowledge that Steve suffered a full mental meltdown 6 weeks ago. Sorry. It was very frightening. He didn't want to go on living anymore. I felt total failure to everyone. So I had him call a doctor who prescribed antidepressants and anxiety tablets. I also called a friend who was a psychotherapist to come and see him. I was so worried. This was a man who normally has unlimited self-control in stressful situations, which running this business obviously has many. I just really want to say, I really see. I feel it's already been punished enough. I hope you will not take it from him. Thank you.
It was very difficult to hear you there, Mrs. Kerr. Have you finished?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Harrison, are you on the line?
Stephen Dransfield, yeah, I'm Carol Harrison's husband. Yeah, I'd just like to say, I mean, I've listened to this from start to finish, and oh no, are we getting an echo?
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
We can hear you, Mr. Harrison. What would you like to say to the committee?
Okay. Well, I've listened to the proceedings from start to finish, and I have to say that I've witnessed on a number of occasions that there was questions to whether or not the uniformed police did come that many times. I can witness 3 occasions out of those 8 where the police did turn up and were perfectly happy with the arrangements and left smiling and waving, no problem. So everything that Mr. Kerr has said is, in my opinion, perfectly true. Now, he may have made a mistake with his glass of wine. None of us are perfect, and certainly none of us fully understand, as members of the public, and I run a business too, and I have to be careful for my employees. But none of us can be 100% certain about what the guidelines are. We know about 2 metres, we know about all the other things that are given. I have no doubt that Mr. Kerr, to the very best of his ability, and to what I can witness, has adhered to those principles. And as for the 60 people that night, I don't drink, but I call there sometimes when I walk my dog just for a sit and a rest. And there were never 60 people that night, nowhere near. So, as I say, I fully back what Mr. Kerr said. I think the way things are being twisted is rather awful, the way he's being represented and the way it's being questioned, and the rather aggressive, constant repetition of these questions. This isn't a court of law. This isn't a murder trial. I just think it's been a little bit heavy-handed. But as I say, I can honestly back up his statements, and from my limited experience of the police visits, there wasn't a problem. No problem was mentioned. They were happy that what was happening was within the guidelines as understood. That's really all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Mrs. Harrison? Are you available?
Was that understood? Has it been heard?
Yeah, yes, it has been heard. Is
Hello?
Mrs. Harrison available?
Hello?
Mrs.
Hello?
Harrison, was you?
Hello?
I don't think you can hear me.
Mr. Harrison, I'm Tony Dales. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, yes.
I've lost the connection with the committee, I believe. I can't hear them either, sorry.
Right.
This is Roger. I can hear you too. I can't hear anybody else.
Right, so it sounds like we have a technical issue.
Hello, committee. This is Tony Dales. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, can hear you.
Can you hear us?
This is Stephen. This is Stephen. Did the committee hear what I said?
Yes, we heard what you said. Can you hear us?
I can hear you now, yes.
Thank you.
Lovely. Okay. So is Mrs. Harrison available to make representations?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd really just like to say that, well, as what Mr. Harrison has said, which I agree with absolutely, and listening to Stephen Kerr, I really cannot say any more to top that, because what he said is absolutely true. I can only reiterate what we put in our email, which was that he's a very caring person. He's one of the most kindest, caring, upstanding and law-abiding people on the hillside. He's had an exemplary career in the licensing industry, and it would be a great loss to the
Have we lost you there? Have you finished, Mrs. Harrison?
society, which is his. It speaks volumes of his nature. That is exactly who the man is. Alcohol is sold via the off-licence service. It's being consumed off the licensed premises, occasionally in the adjacent field, which is the place that we're talking about that's unlicensed on the grassed area. I have also been present when the police have visited, and there doesn't seem to have been a problem. They have indeed gone away without any apparent problem whatsoever. And so when Mr. Kerr says that he was very shocked that they turned up, I can wholeheartedly sympathise with him, because I would have been as well. He runs a fantastic community pub, and it would be very unjust if he wasn't allowed to continue to do so. And that's really all I have to say as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Harrison. Mr. Hunt?
Hello, yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, I've been a resident in the area for about 15 years now. And when I heard that Steve was operating the take-up.
Mr. Hunt?
Sorry.
I think we've lost you. Can you hear us? Mr. Hunt? I think we may have some technical issues there again. Okay, can we move on to Mr. Folds then, please, if he's available?
Sorry,
Hello?
Chair, I think we're just having some issues at the moment.
Should we wait a little while until those are resolved?
If that's okay, if we're just okay just to hold for a couple of minutes, I believe we may have lost the call, so I'll just try to reconnect.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the licensing panel meeting, which is being webcast and recorded. Before the break, we had some technical issues, so we took some time, and hopefully that's now resolved itself, but it meant that we struggled to hear at least one of the witnesses, Mrs. Harrison. So I wonder if Mrs. Harrison can again go through her representations, please. What would you like to say to the panel, Mrs. Harrison?
Right, you didn't get any of that then.
Well, I got some of it, but we lost you at certain parts, so it'd be useful if you could go through it again, please. Thank you.
All right, well, it was really to reiterate what we said in the email. I was agreeing with what what Stefan said, but also to say that Mr. Kerr had provided a very good service to vulnerable people during the COVID lockdown. And without that service, a lot of people on the hillside would have suffered because it was difficult for them to get their supplies, etc., from anywhere else, being fairly remote up here. Also, I think we all heard Mr. Kerr speak, and he was very emotional, and that is Steve Kerr. That is the man. He is very caring. He's a very kind and considerate person. He's very law-abiding, and he has had an exemplary career in the licensing industry. It would be a great loss to this community if he wasn't allowed to continue. And in fact, actually, it would be a great injustice. The few times that I have been at the Rose and Crown during a lockdown period, I've been given a drink, most of the time a coffee, and I have then been directed down to the grassed area. Social distancing, in my opinion, I've been taken note of at all times. And just coming on to the matter of the police turning up, the police did turn up on one occasion while I was there, and there didn't appear to be any problems. They went away smiling, happy faces, and apparently everything was okay. Steve did mention to me that he'd asked them as well if he was doing anything wrong, and Dan said no. So that's really all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Harrison. Mr. Hunt, are you on the line?
Yes.
Thank you. What would you like to say to the panel?
Well, did you not get my statement from earlier then?
We have a number of statements. Would you like to say anything in addition to what you've sent in?
Well, no, my spoken submission just before the phone link did people not get that?
No.
No, right. Well, all I was saying was my wife has cystic fibrosis, and so we have been very careful in the lockdown to obviously follow the distancing rules because she's on the highly vulnerable list. And we thought that Steve operated the takeaway business perfectly. I was very concerned about where I could go to buy some beer, and I thought that Steve would do the right thing, and he did do the right thing. I went to the premises, I waited outside, Steve filled up my kegs, he brought them back out, he put them on a table 3 yards away from me. I picked them up, but then I paid contactless by a little machine, and I left. That was the procedure every time I went. I didn't see anything untoward going on.
Mr. Hunt, have you finished?
To this whole process, I said that earlier, I don't know if it was caught by anybody. I think it's ridiculous that Steve's name has been dragged through the mud in this manner. I think his reputation's been tarnished unnecessarily, and I don't see the upside to any of this from the police or anybody. They're sort of pushing to shut down a pub that will cost 20 people the jobs. There's all the sort of ripple effects that would cause Steve's suppliers a lost business to them. There's a loss of revenue to the local tax authorities. There's a loss of
revenue all over the place. And that's before you even come to the hundreds of people that use the roads on a regular basis for the birthday parties, for the Christmas gatherings, for the New Year gatherings, for the weddings, for the christenings. It's a wonderful destination pub. It's a country pub that's enjoyed by hundreds and hundreds of people. And I think if his licence were to be revoked, there'd be hundreds and thousands of furious customers who would be disgusted with the decision. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. So we'll move to Mr. Folds.
Thank you. I'd just like to reiterate everything that's been said about the Rose and how important it is to the local community. And that's borne out by the many letters of support which I know the board has seen. Now, this is entirely due to the stewardship of Mr. Kerr and his sense of community, but also his understanding of what the pub means to everybody on the hillside. I would also like to point out how many local people are upset by the statement made in the Examiner that all decisions made and actions taken were purely for financial reasons. And I think this is quite a damning thing to say if you've got no knowledge of the real Steve Kerr. Steve, over the years, has often arranged events for local community events, charity events, and many of these are obviously at financial cost to his own business. His support for the charities and local groups and associations is well known in Slough and a reflection of the character of the man. To imply that Steve had knowingly adopted a cavalier attitude to the law is ridiculous to anybody that knows him. And I'd just like to remind the panel of the comments I made in the letter as to the transformation of the skateboard in under Steve's ownership. Now, I'm not in the least bit surprised in running this off-licence service, as many other pubs have done. It's just the sort of thing that Steve would see as a chance to help out locals in a time when many people are having very, very difficult circumstances. And this is a view that's supported throughout the letters of support you've seen. When you arrive at your conclusion to this hearing, I would request that you bear in mind the high esteem that Steve's held in by local residents, and also what is achieved in transforming a pub that was doomed to closure back into a very much valued and loved local amenity. That's all I've got to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Falls. Mr. Calvert?
Oh, hi, yeah. Sorry, just give me a bit of paper. Yeah, my name's Neil Calvert, and I live on Home Lane, just over the road from the pub. And if you were talking earlier about the photograph TWD2, if you look at that, you see Steve's pub and the car park, and below that the large grassy area, and below that is Home Lane. Well, I live just the other side of the road of Home Lane, so in that respect, I'm the nearest neighbour to the large grassy area. I just want to share my experiences of what's happened during the lockdown period. I want to make three points, if I could. Firstly, my experience of the takeout service is that Steve has been very structured and very careful. And like Mr. Hunter was speaking earlier, I've got a vulnerable son who's a type 1 diabetic, so I would not be putting him at risk. I used the takeout service numerous times during lockdown. I called or texted my order. I collected it from Steve outside the pub at the pub door. He sprayed it all down with some anti-whatever stuff, viral stuff, I'd imagine, and I paid by bank transfer. Steve was doing his absolute utmost to be careful and safe. And in terms of takeouts, let's be honest, he's not alone. I've heard of numerous examples, there must be hundreds of pubs around the country doing similar things, where people are having takeout sales and drinking in all sorts of public spaces. I genuinely believe, I think Steve's just been unlucky that he's got a malicious neighbour who's out to get him. And I don't want to criticise the police in any way whatsoever, but when the police officer was asked about how many complaints had been, he said there's been more than one. Well, I strongly suspect, knowing the neighbourhood as I do, that's more than one from the same household. And if my wife falls out with a neighbour, I'm required to fall out with her as well. So that's not more than one complaint in my view of this. I think it's malicious. One of the reports states that Steve was doing this purely for financial reasons. Well, I can tell you categorically that's not true. I regularly bought, I'm going to give some price of beer here, I regularly bought 4 pints of real ale for £5 or £6. And one time Steve gave me a free refill because it was a bit flat. I've had 4 pints of Peroni, a premium lager, well, the brands are available, for £8, and that's less than you buy it in supermarkets. So to say Steve was doing this for financial gain is absolutely not true.
My second point is about the pub and the community. This is not just a pub where you go for a pint, it's a community hub. This is where friends and groups from around the whole area are able to meet. But in particular, I want to talk about the grassy area, which has come up in a lot of the discussions earlier. I've lived here 17 years. I think Steve said he's been about 13 or 14 years. And many people use that space like a public park. And that's happened even more during lockdown. People have been following the government guidance, go out and get some fresh air, some exercise. And people use that area. So families will bring the kids in a picnic blanket and sit there, get some fresh air. Cyclists and walkers will stop with their flasks and their packed lunches. And exercise groups even warm up on that area. Steve didn't ask them to buy a drink. He didn't ask them to leave. And over the years, he's let people use that space because he's community-minded. He even lets people use the toilets when his pub's not open. Inside or outside lockdown, walkers come in and use the toilet. It stops people using my garden. You know, it's a good service for the community. Now, one of the reports states, I don't know if it was police or licensing, says that alcohol sales have created a public nuisance and a dramatic increase of road traffic noise, I think he talks about. As the neighbour who's closest of anyone to the grassy area and the road from the village, Home Lane, where most traffic comes up, I can categorically state that during lockdown, it has been far quieter than normal. There's been a lot less traffic. So to say there's been any noise or nuisance is just not true. And my third point, and it's perhaps the most important point, the effect on the local economy and employment of the decision taken today. The Rose and Crown is a valuable source of full-time and part-time local employment in a rural area where it's hard to come by. Both my son's first day of employment was washing up at the pub, as has been the case for dozens of other families over the years. This teaches them the value of commitment and hard work, and it helps them build up a little financial cushion before taking on £50,000 student debt. More importantly, there are families who have children to support who work there. So this is not just a pub where you go for a pint, it's so much more, and I hope you take that into account, please. Now, these are unprecedented times we all live in. The whole economy is on its knees, and now is not the time to close a valuable local community business. Now's the time to support businesses, employment, and communities, and I'm pleading with you. So if I could just summarise, I'm sorry to go on too long to summarise, I feel it's important. Steve has been absolutely very careful in his approach to alcohol sales. He has absolutely not been acting for financial gain. And as a neighbour close to both the road up from the village and the grassy area, there has been definitely no noise nuisance. But most importantly, if this pub closes, you're not just closing a pub, you're damaging a community. So when I was looking for the place to send the email to about this, I found Kirklees Council's vision, which talks about supporting a strong and stable economy and thriving communities. I'm sure you know all these. I'm sorry, I'm trying to read them up for people who maybe don't know them. And one of your 3 key principles is working with people, not doing to them. And that talks about working with people and communities to solve problems and make the most of opportunities to develop solutions. I just hope you will look at this as an opportunity to get a sensible solution rather than a problem. Now, finally, none of us have been in a situation like COVID before, where the rules are constantly changing. And again, very respectfully, I think it was a police officer, was talking in his report. He talked about, he said, it's on the day when lockdown eased a bit and shops were allowed to be open. And he said, quite understandably, he said, I'm not quite sure what day that was. I'm not surprised, I'm not criticising. Who knows what the rules are during lockdown? It's constantly changing. I couldn't tell you who's out in my garden, how many family bubbles can come in my house. I'd have to look it up before I did it. Not even Boris Johnson's cabinet can be consistent on the wearing of face masks and pret-a-manger. So to criticise Steve for not following the rules in the current circumstances is really, really unfair. So I would respectfully implore the panel to just think about the Kirklees vision and principles about helping communities and developing solutions. As community leaders, I would respectfully ask you to look at the bigger picture and do the right thing for this community by allowing Steve to keep his licence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Calvert. Okay, so just to clarify, in this application, there's been a number of supporters, which forms part of the bundle that myself and my 2 colleagues have, and we've had an opportunity to read those written representations. But also, I'd like to give an opportunity to anybody who would like to ask questions of the people who have spoken today, the objectors actors. So I will go round and ask if anybody would like to ask questions. So Mrs. Kerr has given information to us. Councillor Hall, do you have any questions?
No, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Lyons? You're on mute, Councillor Lyons.
No, thank you.
Okay. The licensing officer?
No questions from me.
Okay. And the police solicitor?
No, thank you.
Okay. Likewise, in respect of Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, Councillor Hall, do you have any questions?
No, I haven't, thanks.
Councillor Lyons?
No, thank you.
The licence officer?
No, thank you.
And the police, any questions?
Again, no, thank you, ma'am.
Okay. And then Mr. Hunt? So any questions of Mr. Hunt? Councillor Hall?
No, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Lyons?
No, thank you.
Licence officer?
No, thank you, Chair.
And the police, okay. And the police, any questions?
Sorry, ma'am, I'm having difficulty unmuting. No questions. No questions for any of the supporting statements of fairness.
Okay, that helps. So, Mr. Foles, any questions of Mr. Foles? Councillor Hall?
No, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Lyons?
No, thank you.
Licensing officer?
No questions, and again, save for me, no questions for any of the others.
Okay, so the last one, Mr. Calvert. Councillor Hall, do you have any questions for Mr. Calvert?
No, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Lyons?
No, thank you.
Great, okay. So let's move on. Just bear with me a second. So just for clarity, there aren't any representations today for any other responsible authority. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Okay. So can we move to the summing up then, please? So we're coming to the close of the meeting in terms of giving information. Can I ask that each person who speaks, that you are concise and to the point, please? So can I start with the licensing officer, if you can sum up for us?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify about the plan of the premises. So just to confirm, the plan of the premises does not have off sales. However, that is not the issue, as we are not saying that any licensing regulations have been breached. The issue is that alcohol was sold and consumed at the premises when they should have been closed under the COVID regulations. As a licence holder, it is Mr. Kerr's responsibility to know the regulations and how they apply to the premises. And I've nothing further to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So Mr. Garthwaite, on behalf of the police, could you sum up, please?
Yes, and that is indeed the police position. Whether or not the area in question is subject to unlicensed consumption or no regulation of the licence at all, these form part of the premises. And the fact that the premises were open for people to use the toilets, and the fact that those benches were not taped off, as was explicitly advised by Mr. Woodhead, is the clear issue in this case. It will be akin, I would respectfully say, to Greggs or Costa or some other organisation doing takeouts and putting a table on public streets. It is their responsibility to ensure that that is not there. The regulations are clear. Premises must be closed unless they are doing takeouts. And premises extends beyond the mere physical building. If Mr. Kerr is under a misapprehension as to what he has done, then that still does not, unfortunately, get round the breach. Whether it is a deliberate act on his part or a misunderstanding on his part, only goes towards sanction, I would respectfully say. It does not go against the fact that this committee should take action against him. To do otherwise sends out a very dangerous message to other licensees of this area that this type of behaviour will be tolerated, and should there be a second lockdown, then I'm afraid there is the great risk that those people who I accept are suffering financial hardship and have my every sympathy on that front. But unfortunately, the control of a virus that has effectively shut down the world takes precedence over profit. And I'm afraid if people think that the opposite is true, then there is a risk that this will occur again, should there be a second lockdown. Those are my summing up representations.
Okay, Mr. Dales, on behalf of Mr. Kerr.
Yes, thank you. Okay, we've heard today accounts from police licensing, Mr. Kerr, the community. The decision for the committee today is to determine the most appropriate and proportionate response to the information put before you. That's quite simple. From a police and licensing perspective, they've given their case to you for you to decide, and they've said that Mr. Kerr's actions warrant at most a suspension of the licence, or as an alternative, the inclusion of new licensing conditions, particularly the use of CCTV. I'm going to cover that in a minute to give you that opportunity. What we do know is that Mr. Kerr has run the Rose and Crown impeccably for the past 13 years without any concerns. The government go ahead and allowed him to sell alcohol for off sales. We've heard that he sold one glass of wine, and if there has been any mistakes by Mr. Kerr, they have been through misinterpretation, not intentional, not willful, and certainly not purely for financial gain. I think the support of what I've heard from the community today has been humbling, and that says all of it. I'm not going to linger over the issue of the grass area, other to say that it is an unlicensed area, and I think there's a solution to that in the licensing conditions at the end of my submission. The use of the toilets and the fact that that is a bar, going into the bar, well, you've seen the pictures. They were exactly in front of the door. I'd like to draw your attention to TWD 9, which you've all had, and I'm sure you've read, where the government did give guidelines out for licensees that with the proper risk assessment and the proper location of a toilet, they can remain open, and they are at times an effective answer to reducing public nuisance. And so we get to the final bit, really. Mr. Kerr has voluntarily closed his premises, and he doesn't intend opening until the end of the month. The reason for that is twofold. He felt that he wanted to get this right today and to put his case over to the committee, for them to make the decision in order to he then could determine what he's going to do with the premises. Obviously, if revocation or the suspension of the licence occurs, then the likelihood is that that will result in the loss of jobs and quite a hit for the community. So let me conclude with this. Mr. Kerr is keen to work with the licensing department and the police, and if he is allowed to remain open, he's actually employed me now as his licensing consultant to, one, provide additional training to his staff on licensing COVID issues post-lockdown, to adopt a due diligence folder, which I believe Laura has distributed to everybody, so that they can catch sight of the document, which is to deal with all elements of licensing compliance, and in particular, most importantly, the 4 licensing objectives, which I know that you'll be fully aware of. For me, to be able to submit a variation of the premises license as well, to get clear and concise drawings of both the premises patio area and grassed area, would, I think, be a massive bonus to everybody, and that there was no confusion then about this particular area. And Mr. Kerr is very keen that we do that. And then finally, Mr. Kerr does have a CCTV system. It's not included on his premises licence. And he is very keen for that system to be upgraded, to be included in the premises licence. It will mean that he'll have a full digital system, recording for 28 days, with the ability to provide information to the police as and when they need it. I believe that those 4 things that I've just said could be factored into the additional licensing conditions, which is one of the alternatives that you do have, is to amend the licensing conditions to your satisfaction. And I think those 4 amendments, including all that I've said, would be a way round this. I do honestly feel that Mr. Kerr has suffered a great deal already, both financially. He paid a fixed penalty, he took the punishment, and he is extremely sorry. And that's been borne out and clear today, that he's been very sorry that we've got to this situation, and he has apologised for that. I personally would like to thank the committee for their time and their their efforts to get this running today. I think it's been a credit to Laura, who's worked extremely hard, and the way that you've dealt with the technical problems, I think, are second to none. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, everyone. So we've now had an opportunity to listen to all the evidence that's been given and obviously consider the documents that have been provided. We now need a chance to retire, to consider and to make our decision. So to hear the decision made by the panel, all participants can watch the outcome via the webcast. You should have received an email from Laura Dobson giving instructions on how to get on the webcast. So at this stage, we will be leaving to consider. So the decision itself will be delivered on the webcast today, and the decision will also be sent out in writing. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the panel hearing. The panel have had an opportunity to consider the evidence that's been given. And it's important for the panel, obviously, to take into account what's been said and what information has been provided. The panel take the view that breaching of the lockdown rules and breaching of the law is very, very serious. And it's important that we send out a clear message to other licence holders and to members of the public. We take into account Mr. Kerr's previous character and that he has been punished because he's admitted the offence and received a penalty notice for it. And on that basis, we have come to the decision that the licence should be suspended for a period of 28 days from today. We would encourage Mr. Kerr to follow the legal guidelines and best practice in relation to cleaning, sanitation and keeping records, cleaning records going forward when the premises reopen. And also encourage Mr. Kerr to seek advice from the licensing authority if there's if he's unsure about anything. And he also has an advisor there who has spoken to us today, Mr. Dales. He can approach him in the future for anything that he's unsure about. So that's a decision that's been made, and that decision will also be sent out in writing. So thank you, everyone, and that's the end of the meeting.
Mm.